What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be going through my top 20 running back rankings for the 2024 redraft season. As always, I want to hear your guys' feedback. Which players would you have higher or lower? Going to be splitting these running backs up into tiers, and let's just jump right into it. We're going to start off with my running back one. In tier 1, it's going to be Christian McCaffrey. It seems like at this point he's being viewed as the consensus 101. He averaged 24.5 PPR points per game last season. He's been a top 2 running back in points per game in his last 4 full seasons, which is just excluding his rookie year. And I'd expect he sees similar usage to last season, so it's tough to not have CMC here up as my RB1. Now, also in tier 1, I think with these next two guys, if we wanted to make a million tiers, they'd probably be, a step below Christian McCaffrey. But just to keep this video somewhat concise, we're going to be going with Breece Hall as my RB2 in tier 1. He was the RB6 last year in points per game. He was cleared for a full workload in week 5. From that point until the end of the season, he averaged 19.3 PPR points per game. That would have been the running back 3. And he's heading into 2024 with a massive quarterback upgrade, going from like Zach Wilson to now Aaron Rodgers, and also a much improved offensive line. So he was giving you nearly 20 points per game when healthy, with a pretty terrible supporting cast last year. Massive upgrades all around. We know he has that 3-down skill set, a great pure runner, great pass catcher. I think Breece Hall has some legit upside this season. Now pivoting over to my RB3 and wrapping up tier 1, it's going to be Bijan Robinson. He's another guy whose offensive situation has just massively improved. Arthur Smith is finally gone. He gets a massive quarterback upgrade with Kirk Cousins, and Bijan was effective with his opportunities last year. I know we remember him being disappointing for fantasy, and he definitely was. I think heading into the year, he was my RB2, RB3, somewhere in there. That definitely did not pan out. But it was really just due to his total number of opportunities. He only had a 52.5% opportunity share. That's crazy for, someone with his draft capital and how successful he was. I would be shocked if here heading into 24, he was not like the clear 3-down RB1. Looking back on it, we knew it during the season, but his 2023 role was just straight up coaching malpractice. Trying to force a committee with Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and Cordell Patterson. It was just a wild decision for Arthur Smith to make, but he's now gone. Bijan Robinson should be rolling here as a high-end running back 1 moving forward. Now pivoting into tier 2, my RB4 is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, and after he returned from the hamstring injury earlier on in the season, he averaged 19.4 PPR points per game over his last 10 games, and I think he also should be building on his 51.2% opportunity share. I don't think Jahmyr Gibbs is ever going to be a 3-down workhorse, getting 70+% opportunity share. I don't think the Lions want that, just given his size. He's not a huge running back, but going from 51%, maybe he's more in that 60 range, 60-40 split with David Montgomery. I think that definitely gives him 20+ point per game upside. I just have him in a tier below the top 3 because I don't think he can compete with that true ceiling of a guy like CMC, Breece Hall, or Bijan Robinson. He's going to have the efficiency, he's going to have the receiving usage, and he's going to have touchdown upside being on this top offense, but I just don't think he's going to have the overall workload to really carry him to a 23, 24+ point per game season, which I think is all in the cards for Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson. And then my only other tier 2 running back is going to be Jonathan Taylor. He's coming off a not-so-great 2023. It was kind of just odd overall. He didn't play the first game until week 5 due to contract issues. Then he didn't get his typical usage until week 7. And then in his 7 games as a starter, he averaged 16.1 points per game. So solid production. I think if you're picking him as the RB5 and he averages 16 points per game, maybe you're a little bit disappointed. But I do think with Anthony Richardson coming back, I feel like Jonathan Taylor's efficiency is just going to be insane. Maybe he loses out, a little bit on the goal line here, but I feel like he's going to be locked in for 5+ yards per carry. I'm really high on this Colts offense. With Shane Steichen as the head coach, you have solid weapons with Pittman, Downs, Mitchell, JT in the run game, a solid offensive line. I really think this offense is going to produce, and I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be a really strong play. Similar to Jahmyr Gibbs, I do think he lacks that upside we see in tier 1, just because I don't know if the receiving usage is going to be there. But we've seen JT give you a 20+ point per game season. I think he could definitely do it again here, being carried by efficiency and potentially touchdowns if he hits in that area. Now, pivoting into tier 3, my RB6 is going to be Devon Achane, and I'm probably going to be higher on him than consensus. He's coming off just an insane rookie season. This dude was the RB5 in points per game, and if you remove the 2 games where he played under 10% of the snaps, he would have averaged 20.8 points per game. I feel like a lot of people are going to be scared off by his potential workload or the fact that the Dolphins went out and drafted Jalen Wright. But I feel like with Achane here, at 5'9", 190, like, he was never going to be the workhorse. There was always going to be someone competing with him, probably Raheem Mostert here in the short term, and then once Raheem Mostert's gone, I think that's when Jalen Wright is going to step in and be his, like, 1B in this committee. But, I mean, if he can jump from, like, a 40.6% opportunity share, which he had last year, to 50, anywhere over 50, honestly, I think he'll be in a great spot. He really is just like the perfect fit for this Mike McDaniel offense. He's probably the top head coach who's going to be able to maximize his workload. The fact that he's never going to have a huge workload, you need him to be efficient on his opportunities, and that certainly worked here as a rookie. He had by far the highest rushing yards over expected per attempt. Christian McCaffrey was number 2 at 1.32. Achane was at 2.87. Like, that is just unheard of for a running back, especially, like, he had solid volume. It's not like it was on no carries. He also led all running backs in yards per touch. So maybe he's not, like, as freakishly efficient as he was in 2023, but I think we know he's going to be efficient. He's going to have touchdown upside. He's going to be a big play threat. So I'm still very high on Achane, even with the competition brought back in free agency and then also in the draft. Then behind Achane, I'm going to have Saquon Barkley here, and I feel like I'm not quite as high on the landing spot as others are. I feel like people, hear Eagles, they think about their great run game, and it's viewed as like an awesome spot for running backs. I think Saquon's definitely going to be very efficient on the ground. I think from that perspective, it's a nice fit, but I feel like the touchdowns and receiving usage are definitely concerns. We did see the Eagles increase their passing volume to running backs last year. Prior to 2023, they were pretty much, bottom of the NFL in terms of targets to the running backs. They bring in DeAndre Swift. You have Kenneth Gainwell. They were much more in the middle of the pack, which I expect them to stay there. Like, I wouldn't expect a huge increase because you had 2 solid pass-catching backs there last year, so why are you going to bump it up for Saquon, who's also a strong pass-catching back? I think the biggest area of concern for me is the touchdowns. Jalen Hurts has 10 or more rushing touchdowns in each of the last 3 seasons. He has 28 total rushing touchdowns the last 2 years. Their tush push has been so effective, I don't see why you pivot away from it. Maybe with Jason Kelce retiring, they're not as successful. But if you're locked into a spot here where Hurts is just vulturing every touchdown within like the 2-yard line, it's going to be tough for Saquon to hit a true elite ceiling. So that's probably why I have him a little bit lower than some people out there. And then my final tier 3 running back is going to be Kyren Williams. I do think he takes a little bit of a hit with the Rams going out and drafting Blake Corum in round 3, but I definitely don't think it's going to tank his fantasy value. To be totally honest, like, I was really on board with getting Kyren Williams early as like a waiver wire pickup. I think after week 1, I was telling people to pick him up. But after that, like, I was pretty hesitant to buy into him throughout the rest of the season. And then, even heading into future seasons, I was pretty hesitant. Early on, he was getting volume, he was getting into the end zone, but he wasn't super efficient on his opportunities. But over a much larger sample size throughout the entire year, he ended up just being a really, really good running back. He had the 7th most rushing yards over expected per attempt, which is solid efficiency for, averaging 19 carries a game. So just looking at this backfield, this is my take. This is how I'm viewing it. Sean McVay has come out and talked about how he believes Blake Corum and Kyren Williams have very similar skill sets. I think Sean McVay and the Rams are kind of viewing Blake Corum as like the insurance policy for Kyren Williams. Kyren's 5'9", he's sub 200. He hasn't been the most durable guy in his 2 NFL seasons. So I feel like they have Corum there to step in if Kyren Williams were to go down. I think Corum is more of like an elite top tier handcuff, not someone who's going to come in and replace Kyren or be like in a locked in like 55-45 split. I don't think Kyren's opportunity share is going to be like close to 80% like we saw last year. I think it will decrease, but I still think he's a very viable running back 1 here. And I think Blake Corum is also very interesting as someone who's probably a top tier handcuff option. We've seen that Sean McVay really likes to feed his running back 1. So if Kyren's getting fed, Kyren goes down, maybe not the most durable guy, Blake Corum could step in and be a weekly RB1 with the Kyren Williams injury. Now, pivoting into tier 4, we're going to go with Derrick Henry here. And you got to love the landing spot here for Derrick Henry. The Ravens, I guess the one, criticism you'd have of their offense is that for the running back specifically, is that they don't target the running backs in the pass game, but that's not Derrick Henry's strength. So not too big of a deal. This backfield last year averaged 24.3 PPR points per game, and that was with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill taking the majority of the touches. You now bring in Derrick Henry, who is a significantly better running back than those two. I think he's in a great spot. We do have to acknowledge the risk, though. I think people are going to have him higher. Every time I rank Derrick Henry, there are always going to be the Derrick Henry truthers who are upset with the ranking. They think he should be way higher, but we do have to acknowledge the risk here. He's 30 years old. He has an insane amount of tread on the tires here, especially here in the NFL. His workloads have been crazy, and serious regression will be coming, and it could come at any time, right? He could fall off a cliff here heading into 2024. Obviously, I don't think that's super probable because I have him here as my RB9, but there's just going to be more risk involved in drafting a guy like Derrick Henry as opposed to some of the other younger backs. Now, also in tier 4, going to be going with Travis Etienne. He had the 6th highest opportunity share last season, finished as the RB6 in points per game. So overall, a pretty solid season. He saw increased receiving production, which was fun. We didn't know if he was going to get that after his rookie year. It was kind of odd because he was a strong pass catcher in college. Didn't translate as a rookie, but it did in year 2. Unfortunately, with that increased receiving usage, his efficiency on the ground fell off. He was great on the ground as a pure runner as a rookie, 1.07 rushing yards over expected per attempt, but he fell to negative 0.29 this past season. I think if we can get some combination of his 2023 workload with his 2022 efficiency, he definitely has 20-plus point per game upside. We'll see if he'll be able to unlock that this season. Also in tier 4, going with Isaiah Pacheco. And like full transparency here on Pacheco, I was pretty low on him heading into 2023, and I've been low on him in Dynasty. Typically, day 3 picks have very long-term security. Even if they play well, they're set up to get replaced. If they get injured, there's no guarantee they have that job back. But I think Pacheco is in a great spot heading into this season. He was the running back 14 in points per game last year. The Chiefs have done pretty much nothing to add in any running back competition. He should be walking in as the clear-cut running back 1. And I also think there's reason to believe that he could improve on his 2023 season. Last year, the Chiefs were 14th in points scored. They were top 6 from 2018 to 2022. So this was like a rare down year from this offense. They brought in new weapons, drafted Xavier Worthy, brought in Hollywood Brown. I think this offense is due to bounce back to, pretty much what we had come to expect with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, which means Isaiah Pacheco should have even more touchdown upside. There were concerns about how much receiving work he would get. He was a solid piece of this receiving offense. He's never going to be like, top 5 in terms of like receptions or receiving yards, but you just need some production to complement his work on the ground and his touchdown upside. So I am pretty high in Pacheco here as my RB11. And then my final tier 4 running back is going to be Josh Jacobs. I think people aren't going to like this ranking here at RB12, but I think we do just have to recognize he should be a tough guy to rank. This Packers landing spot does have a lot of upside. It's a young, up-and-coming offense. You have LaFleur there as a bright, offensive-minded head coach. And Josh Jacobs has also, shown the ability to handle a workhorse role. We know if the Packers ask him to do that, in the past he's been able to come through. But I think we also have to acknowledge that it's possible he started to already fall off. And it might seem crazy because like Josh Jacobs isn't like 29, 30 years old. He shouldn't be dipping in his production. But last year was pretty brutal out of him. He was the running back 18 in fantasy points per game. He averaged 3.5 yards per carry. He's also negative 0.37 in rushing yards over expected per attempt. And you can blame the situation all you want. Zamir White was at a positive 0.33. So Zamir White in the same offense was pretty efficient as a runner. Josh Jacobs was not. And the Packers also aren't committed to him long term. It was a 4-year deal, but they have an out after 1 season. So if he's kind of cooked, they can completely move on from him. They have other backs there. A.J. Dillon, who I'm not a huge fan of, but the Packers clearly like him and have used him, even though he hasn't been super productive. And they also drafted Marshawn Lloyd, who I liked. It seems like they're interested in him and want to get him on the field here in year 1. So I think Jacobs does have some upside in this Packers offense. But I think we do have to acknowledge there's definitely some risk here. And it's just, he's tough to rank, right? Because he was pretty rough last year. That carries into 2024. You're probably looking at a bust pick here. But if he bounces back to 2022 production, then you're probably looking at a steal. So that's where I'm at with Josh Jacobs. Let me know which side of that coin you guys are on down below. But shifting into tier 5, going to start off this tier with James Cook. He really had solid production outside of the touchdowns in 2023. He was 4th in rushing yards, 8th in receiving yards, 2nd in yards per reception, but he only got into the end zone 6 times. On the season, James Cook had 5 total drops. At least that was according to a Player Profiler. I know different sources, count those differently, but 5 drops. 4 of those likely would have gone for touchdown. Like legitimately 4 of those where he was either in the end zone, dropped it, or like 2-3 yards away from getting into the end zone. So even if he's not getting the goal line looks, like on this Bills offense, he should still be outperforming 6 touchdowns. If he does, convert on those, I think we're looking at him a lot differently heading into next year. So I like James Cook here. He was a mid-tier RB2 last season. I think it's definitely fair to draft him as like a higher end RB2. And then also in tier 5, going with Joe Mixon. Seems like he has a great opportunity to be the workhorse here for this Texans offense. Devin Singletary's gone. Dameon Pierce was pretty terrible last year, and it seems clear that this coaching staff really, is not committed to him. This was not the coaching staff that brought him in. Mixon has also pretty consistently handled large workloads. He's been a top 7 running back in opportunity share in every season outside of his rookie year. But with those, large workloads, he's also been pretty inefficient consistently. He's underperformed his expected points per game ever since it started being tracked in 2020. And this Texans backfield also wasn't overly productive in 2023. They only averaged collectively 17.7 PPR points per game. The Texans were also a fairly balanced offense. They were 12th in pass play percentage. You would have to expect that to go up with them adding Stephon Diggs and just the weapons they have at wide receiver. So I feel like Mixon's in a spot here where he's going to grind his way to like back-end RB1 production, high-end RB2 production. It's hard to get overly excited just because, he's been inefficient throughout his career, hasn't necessarily consistently delivered like higher-end RB1 seasons. I think he's a guy where in more casual leagues, home leagues, I think he's going to go a lot earlier than this, but for me, he's like a high-end RB2. And then behind him, we are going with Rachaad White. And White was great for fantasy last year, was the RB10 in points per game. But from a real-life perspective, he wasn't all that great. Solid receiving usage, but he actually had the most rushing yards under expected out of all running backs. You also have his former offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, is gone, and Canales was feeding Rachaad White. Who knows if they have the same perspective heading into next season. On the bright side, though, there was definitely concern about competition being brought in for Rachaad White. They pretty much did nothing in free agency. The only real competition they added was Bucky Irving, and it's kind of interesting because both guys have pretty complementary skill sets. They excel in the receiving game. As pure runners, there's definitely some question marks out there. I wouldn't be shocked if Rachaad White loses work just because, like I talked about, he wasn't all that great last year, especially as a pure runner. So I wouldn't be shocked if he starts to, give up some work in this backfield. But then you also look at like who he could potentially be giving it up to. Bucky Irving's a day 3 pick. He's an undersized back. He tested really poorly, which is not a great sign for these smaller backs. So it's also tough to then expect Bucky Irving to come in and carve out a large role. So I feel like this might be kind of a gross backfield, an inefficient unit. I think ranking him here as a high-end RB2 is fair. We saw last year with a huge opportunity share. He wasn't unlocking like a crazy high ceiling. So, if he keeps that role, maybe he's a mid-tier RB1, back-end RB1, probably more of a back-end RB1. If he retreats some of that workload, then he's probably finishing like mid-tier RB2 territory. So RB15, I think, is a fair spot. And then we have 2 more running backs here in tier 5. The next one's going to be Alvin Kamara. He was the running back 3 in points per game last year. So you may be wondering, like, how does he go from RB3 to now being ranked RB16? I just think it's tough to expect similar usage that we saw last year. He averaged 13.8 carries per game, but was the 4th worst in rushing yards over expected per attempt, so he wasn't efficient with his rushing opportunities. He was also just funneled targets, 6.7 targets a game, but he was 26th in yards per reception, so not overly efficient with those opportunities. I think you have to expect Kendre Miller to be more involved here in his second season, assuming he can stay healthy. And I just feel like there's a lot of empty volume out there for Kamara. I don't think we can bank on that, but like, who knows? If Kendre Miller doesn't play well, maybe they just start force feeding Alvin Kamara again. But he is getting up there in age. We're at the point where, a fall off could be coming here. And now my final tier 5 running back, we're going to be going with Aaron Jones. And injury has really just messed with his 2023 season. He missed 4 games with a hamstring strain and then 3 games with a knee sprain. But going to Minnesota, he is a massive upgrade in running back play over Madison and Ty Chandler. And if we remove his 2 injured games from last year, he would have been the RB18 in points per game. So even in a down year, RB18, solid production, pretty much where I have him ranked here. And in his 4 previous seasons, he was at worst RB11. I think he's a nice RB2 for your roster here in Minnesota, like him combined with Kevin O'Connell. So Aaron Jones here, my RB17. And then pivoting into my final tier, tier 6, I'm going to start off this tier with Jonathan Brooks. And I'm very high on Brooks, both in redraft and dynasty. Probably going to be higher on him than consensus, but I truly do think he can be a league winner here. He's not a guy who's going to be putting up top production out of the gate. We just have to accept that. He's coming off a torn ACL, but all the medical reports I've seen have been very positive. Positive to the point where he could definitely be playing in week 1. And obviously people don't love betting on a running back coming off a torn ACL, and I get it. It makes sense. But I was pretty high on Breece Hall last year. That definitely worked out. And when we're going to bet on a running back, I'd rather bet on the dude who's 20 years old still very, very young, an impressive athlete. That's the guy who I think can kind of, break the norm. And we also saw his head coach, Dave Canales, use Rachaad White like a complete workhorse. They draft him in the 2nd round. Getting drafted mid-2nd round coming off a torn ACL, that is significant in today's NFL. He's also been hyping up Jonathan Brooks, talks about using him traditionally, while also scheming him up in the passing game. I'm really liking this landing spot. I think maybe a slow start to the season, in a committee, easing him back with Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, but I really do think second half of the season, I feel like Jonathan Brooks could be absolutely balling, and I think we could see a crazy tear to end the season. So Jonathan Brooks, my RB18. Then behind Brooks, going to be going with Kenneth Walker. Definitely going to be lower on Walker than consensus, and this is more due to the situation, not how I view him as a player. I just struggle to see Kenneth Walker's upside here without a Zach Charbonnet injury. A lot of these other running backs, right? You can picture the upside. Jonathan Brooks being the workhorse. Aaron Jones being the clear RB1 for the Vikings. Kamara, if he just somehow repeats his usage from last year. Rachaad White maintaining his usage. For Kenneth Walker, I feel like at worst, Charbonnet is going to be a nuisance. And I also feel like people aren't factoring in that, Charbonnet could take a bigger piece of the pie than people are expecting here. As a rookie, Charbonnet out-targeted Walker. He was the better college pass catcher. I feel like you have to assume Charbonnet is going to maintain that, lead role as the pass-catching option for this team out of the backfield. Charbonnet was also just straight up better as a pure runner. He was better in rushing yards over expected per attempt. And last season, Kenneth Walker was the RB20 in points per game. He did that with a near 70% opportunity share. He was getting a solid piece of this offense. I think we could definitely see this being more 60-40, 55-45. I think the disparity I've seen in ADP between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet is kind of wild to me. I think they should be a lot closer together. I think Charbonnet is probably going to be someone I'm targeting pretty heavily. I still would lean towards Kenneth Walker being the RB1, but I feel like people are expecting him to walk into a clear RB1 role, even if there's somewhat of a split, whether it's 70-30, somewhere in there. I feel like that's the expectation, and I'm just not super confident that that's actually going to be the case. I feel like Charbonnet is going to be more involved than people are expecting, especially heading into his 2nd season. They eased him in last year. I think he's going to be a bigger piece here in 2024. And then my final running back, my RB20, it's going to be David Montgomery. And I'm someone who likes to shoot for upside at the running back position. Safety doesn't really exist because the position is so injury prone. But David Montgomery, I think he has, some unique upside here because he's the rare running back who week to week can give you running back 2 production, but also has handcuff upside. Last year, he was the running back 15 in points per game. I feel like he's probably going to fall off from that, just given the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs is the better running back, was a rookie last year. They eased him in. Montgomery had a 54% opportunity share. Maybe that falls 50, sub 50, 45, somewhere in there, a 55-45 split with Montgomery on the B side of that. But I still think with that production, he can be a weekly back-end RB2. This is a really good Lions offense. I think they're still going to use him primarily as the goal line back. But if Jahmyr Gibbs were to ever go down, like David Montgomery's upside is high-end RB1 week to week. In 2023, Gibbs left early in week 4, and then he also missed week 5. In week 4, Montgomery logged 32 carries, 2 targets. In week 5, he logged 19 carries, 6 targets. So if Gibbs were to go down for, a few weeks, a significant period of time, I feel like David Montgomery is giving you insane volume at the running back position. And the fact that he can, pretty much live up to this ADP with Jahmyr Gibbs healthy, but also has that upside, I think that's why I have him ranked here as my RB20. And that's going to wrap it up for my top 20 running back rankings. Let me hear your guys' thoughts down below. Which players are too high, too low? Stay tuned. I'm going to be going through my wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends within the next few days. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.